I'd just like to welcome everyone to this evening's exhibition opening. My name's Bernie Hawke, I'm the manager of the Dunedin Public Libraries, and it's my very great pleasure to welcome you to this evening's exhibition opening. This exhibition is called Our Will and Pleasure, and it's a very unique exhibition in many ways. One expects public libraries to have books, newspapers, magazines, and nowadays e-books, DVDs, music CDs, but one doesn't usually expect libraries to have a collection of over 5,000 autographed letters from the royalty of particularly the UK, but other countries as well. So it's our delight to provide this collection to you. And this is in fact the first time that these items have been exhibited, so this is a special event for you and for the Dunedin community. We've had these collections in our custody for some time. In fact, it was A.H. Reid who collected these items between the 1920s and the 1930s. Many of them bought, and he compiled an absolutely spectacular collection of autographed letters, which number about 5,000 items, and they date from the 17th to the 20th century. So a quite unique and outstanding collection. The exhibition has been put together really to coincide with the Diamond Jubilee of Queen Elizabeth II. So it's our pleasure at this time to create that exhibition. But before I introduce our guest speaker this evening, Professor Chris Ackley, I'd just like to say a few words of thank you to people who've contributed to the exhibition. Firstly, to Anthony Tedeschi. Anthony's our Read Rare Books librarian. There he is, manning the camera. And Anthony is the exhibition curator and collated these items and done all the research behind the scenes to inform us about them. I'd like to acknowledge Casey Thomas, who's been responsible for the graphic design work, and Casey has done a stunning job as usual with this work. And I'd also like to acknowledge Kathleen McCarthy and the bindery team. As usual, they have put in a lot of hours creating the mounts, creating the conservation work to present these works. And this is in fact our third digital exhibition, so if you want to whip home tonight after the exhibition, if you don't get to see everything, it is actually online at the moment, and you can step through screen by screen and have a closer look at all the items. And responsibility for that digital exhibition is again Casey Thomas and Paul Hayton, who is the library's online services coordinator. Now, to launch this exhibition without acknowledging one particular staff member who has put in literally thousands of hours in interpreting and cataloguing these items would be seriously amiss. So I'd really like to acknowledge Diana Cairns. I think it would be safe to say, Diana, that this has been a labour of love over a number of years. Diana's unique knowledge of English history, the monarchy and London itself has created for this library a truly unique set of descriptive records relating to these items, and some treasures have been found in the process. So I'd like to particularly acknowledge Diana and all her work. So now, without further ado, I'll hand over to Professor Chris Ackley, who in the notes provided to me is described as a son of Dunedin, but who has many and varied interests, from studies of Malcolm Lowry to Samuel Beckett, and I look forward to, Chris, to your address and the information that you can comment on this exhibition. So please join me with me in welcoming Chris.
Well, I thought I would start off by demonstrating a piece of memorabilia. This is a royal wedding glass, and on the other side it says HRH, the Prince of Wales and Lady Diana Spencer, 29th of July 1981. And I won this on a horse race in Blackpool. There were about 6 of us lined up with 6 horses, a horse each, and a lot of ping pong balls, and you had to throw them down a hole, and every time your ball went down the right hole, your horse jumped forward 1 space. And I got off to a ripping start, tore up the field, and then my horse stopped about 1 step away from the finishing line, and all the field caught up on me, but fortunately the last one went down, and this was my prize. This was 1982, so clearly it was remaindered. But I'm very proud of it. I thought Bernie, thank you for the kind words, was going to say something too. I foolishly said a few things about the monarchy in my little introductory notes that Anthony was going to manipulate into some kind of little welcome speech. And what I actually called myself was an old-fashioned liberalist who was unfashionably in tandem with sort of vague monarchist support. And I appreciate this as a kind of heresy to those who favour our country coming of age as a republic. But that thought actually, quite frankly, rather terrifies me, because having lived through the Muldoon era, those years, which, as bad as they were, might have been infinitely worse if that drunken accountant had been a president. And I was grateful then, and I still am now, for the kind of constitutional buffer that the monarchy provides to prevent us from imitating, for example, the Argentina, which in the 1940s was one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and the Austral was respected as an international currency. But after a few decades of the Peronistas, followed by the generals, it slid irrevocably into disrepute. And I've always seen that as a kind of object lesson as to what might happen to New Zealand if we are too much the masters of our own fate. This, as I say, is probably an unpopular view, but I think we're too small to go it alone. Now, this does not mean that I have a profound respect for the royals, who sometimes seem rather more poorly house-trained than the corgis. On the whole, I tend to share the opinion that was advanced by the satirical magazine Private Eye, for whom they are a never-failing cornucopia of folly and delight. There was one issue last year which was sort of basically Prince Charles's private diary, and it recounted his nightmare when, having at last, his mother had passed on to a better world. He dreamt that his time had come round at last, only to be told on arrival at the Abbey for the coronation that he had been seated behind the Middletons, but he would still have a very good view of King William. And I also had a little lineup of those extraordinary hats that were worn by Princesses Beatrix and Eugenie. And what they did is they lined them up in the middle of the Teletubbies with their little things on the top of their heads, and it was gloriously satirical. I think most of the world appreciated it very much. I mentioned Argentina a few minutes ago to smuggle in an anticipation of my favourite librarian, which of course is Jorge Luis Borges, one of the truly great writers of the past century. Now, for some years, Borges worked in the National Library of Buenos Aires. While he still had his sight, he basically made it his commitment, knowing that he had inherited a condition from his father that he would be blind by his early 40s. He just read voraciously, and what better place to do it than in a library? So he had the job where he did his day's work in a couple of hours and then spent the rest of his time reading everything that the library possessed. I'm not sure those are the work conditions that prevail today. But there's one story he tells one time when he was accosted by one of his fellows at morning tea, who said, picked up a kind of the latest issue of the Argentine modernist magazine, Sur, very, very good magazine. And the fellow said, look, there's a couple of articles here by somebody who's got the same name as you. In other words, his fellow workers honestly did not know that they were in the presence of one of the truly great figures of world literature. And sadly, when Perón came to power, Borges lost his position in the library and was, so, quote, promoted to being inspector of rabbits and chickens in the Buenos Aires central market. It was a calculated insult because he had been quite outspoken against the kind of Peronist mentality. This is all kind of a vague digression to get to the point. That is one of Borges' truly great metaphors is that of the universal library. The notion of the Platonic edifice in which all books by all writers, and also all the ephemera as well, everything that has been written is ideally catalogued, and that's housed there to be borrowed, to be looked at. Now, of course, what happens, some books get lost, others remain in obscure dark corners and are never found again, others disintegrate. But in principle, they are there. And in that universal library, of which our physical libraries are but a shadow, I think it's an intriguing metaphor, and a number of things follow from it. Most of them are statements of the obvious, such as the comment that yesterday's ephemera are today's memorabilia and tomorrow's treasures. And I think many of the things that we will see in this exhibition fall into that category. A lot of them are actually, probably in their day, were just quite trivial, but of course with time have become objects, I think, of intense interest. I've got a childhood memory of going to Ashbury Park in Timaru to stand in the drizzle for what seemed to be ages, to watch the young Queen Elizabeth, this is 1954, watch young Queen Elizabeth and her handsome sailor whiz by. And to this day, I do not know if I actually saw them or not, but there I was waving my little Union Jack. And so I sort of feel I'm part of that ritual, part of that system. So the greater pleasure then, in looking through the material that we have at the exhibition here, to see things like the royal signatures in the visitors' book, photographs of the Queen and the Duke signing that book, invitations to a concert by Richard Farrell, who died tragically young, just simply 4 years later, invitations to the head librarian of the day, Ada Fach. Is that the pronunciation? Fach, okay. To attend the civic reception held in their honour. From which it follows, a second point, the role of the library as a custodian of the past. And I felt something of that responsibility myself a few years ago when I was asked to write a history of the Otago Bridge Club. And this proved to be both exacting and hugely exciting. I think I refused to do it for a while because I knew to do it properly was going to take a long time, and I wasn't sure that I was prepared to do that. But finally I agreed, and yes, it did take a long time. But the excitement, well, the exacting thing about it was that I became very, very conscious of the responsibility. Tom Brockie probably has this sort of sense of, of taking responsibility for interpreting the past and laying down a kind of statement about, what was happening and how one responds to it now. The process, on the basis of archival evidence, is, and particularly when some of it is quite tatty, sort of committee meetings that are ripped in half and you have to sort of imagine what the rest of the sentence is. It's a process that is full of potential error, and the past, as they most truly say, is another country. But I think it's also exciting because documents of the kind that are exhibited today are, and here's another cliche, windows to the past, a past that otherwise might have remained permanently closed. And so I had the opportunity a few days ago to come down here and have an advance preview of some of the material. I was actually allowed to look at one or two of the books and open them and see one or two things that we can't see behind the glass here. So perhaps a number of little things might be of interest here. One was something that I'd never seen before. Ever since I went to the Gallipoli Peninsula about 25 years ago now, I've been fascinated by the accounts of the Gallipoli campaign. And so the presence of a little book entitled Men of Anzac rather piqued my curiosity. It's included there because it has a kind of identity card of Edward VIII as Prince of Wales. Terrible looking photo. But it's interesting, I think, in its own right. I've never seen one of these things before, a kind of diary or date book with the signatures of many who had been present in the 1915 campaign. And lots of other little oddities going up to World War II placed between the covers. And so I don't know much about this. I'd like to know more. It seems to me it's intriguing. Who issued it, to whom, why? So I think these little things create speculation, and I think that's a good thing. Another oddity was the advent of these coronation Bibles, of which we have two on display here. And one of them, I looked at the bookplate and I rather liked it. Presented to Gordon Chris Evans from Father Christmas. Well, I don't know about these coronation Bibles. Perhaps they were the theological equivalent of coronation chicken, a dish that everybody delights in. But it would be, again, interesting to know what the circumstances were, who gave them, why, and so on. I was also intrigued to notice that there was a related brochure to the royal visit a year or two later, which included advertisements for poultry as well, which again raises thoughts about that coronation chicken, which curiously defined the 1950s as a kind of something that was cheap, readily available, and yet had a kind of a touch of the exotic about it. An affordable dish in an age of austerity such as the 1950s were in both the UK and in New Zealand. So the metaphor is frivolous, but I think it also has its ramifications. Now, as for the exhibition itself, There are some absolute gems in this collection, with authentic signatures of the various monarchs, from Queen Anne and her very childish handwriting, the various Georges, through to Victoria and beyond, including in case 7, a royal pardon, whereby Her Majesty Queen Victoria, Empress of India and Dea Volante, perhaps 1/4 of the globe, is graciously disposed to commute the transportation sentence of 2 wicked women into a full pardon. Again, I'd like to know what the circumstances are. I've been doing a little bit of, with the aid of my sister, who's a trained historian and also a librarian in Christchurch. She's been looking into our family history, and it is full of the most wonderful scandal that nobody ever told me about when I was young. Like my grandfather, who was very virtuous, appearing in Truth with a wonderful divorce case from his first wife, who had gone back home to Wales and came back very pregnant, obviously 18 months later. So, well, I'll tell you what was scary about that, if I may be permitted to there. As I say, he was from a background that was extremely upright, living in Christchurch, from a family whose lasting regret was they came on the second ship, not the first. And he took the appropriate action. That is, his older unmarried sister accompanied the first wife down to Dunedin to await the birth of the child, and that it was announced that the child had been born dead, and that was the end of the matter. Quite frankly, my sister and I don't believe that at all. There was no reason to suspect that the child wasn't healthy, could have been smuggled out, or could have been disposed of. And I just think that something like this, looking at the public records, it opens up the whole sort of vignette, the whole vista of the past, where these stories are going on, the complicated things, the stupid things that people do, you know, as we do today, these things were happening then. And occasionally you get little glimpses into this, and particularly when they relate to one's own heritage, I think they become quite fascinating. So it seems to me that ephemera, memorabilia, trivial little objects, of which some in this display could be called that, and without disrespect, I think they are fascinating ways of looking at the complexity of life in those bygone eras. There are stories behind them. Sometimes it's possible to recover them to great delight. Sometimes they've gone forever. But it is sort of rescuing these things from the mists of time, I think, is one of the things that we are trying to do through our work with archival materials. Another joy, but I think also equally a humiliation, is to discover how little one actually knows about anything. I'd vaguely heard of Anthony Panizzi, but until looking at the letter from Gladstone in box 23, I knew nothing at all about his life. So I looked it up, and what a life it was. I didn't appreciate that the life of a librarian could be so exciting. The early years in Italy as a revolutionary, escaping from a death sentence, ending up in England in 1823 as a penniless exile, but by dint of teaching Italian to bankers and merchants in Liverpool, bettering himself to such an extent that by 1928 he was appointed Professor of Italian in the newly founded University of London. And then he basically combined this with a new job, which was that of assistant librarian in the British Museum, which included in those days, of course, the British Library. And with such success that he rose to become Keeper of Printed Books in 1837 and Principal Librarian in 1857. And under Panizzi, the British Library vastly expanded its collection, and it was he who drew up plans to create extra shelf space by enclosing the forecourt, and this, of course, became the legendary round room in which Karl Marx did his thing. I like the image of Karl Marx writing the treatise of communism in the midst of the capitalist centre of the world at the time. He might not have been able to, were these books not so readily available. And we also know to Panizzi indirectly, we owe to him the founding of the London Library, which is celebrated in the opening pages of A.S. Byatt's Possession, a novel in which librarians are also unlikely heroes. Panizzi had a furious row with Thomas Carlyle, who had been denied special privileges which he demanded, rooms of his own and books to do his great historical works. Panizzi just said no, and so Carlyle stomped off to found his own establishment. From all accounts, it was very easy to get offside with Carlyle, and one of the witticisms of the time is to the effect that the Carlyles, Thomas and Jane, were living proofs of the goodness of God. Yeah, because by marrying each other, they made only 2 people unhappy instead of 4. Now, the book doesn't, the letters and things on display do not tell us these things. But what I think they do in a very satisfying way is they invite us to look through them into the past that lies beyond. And I see that as one of the important functions of an exhibition like that. So, you know, having digressed, Lawrence Sterne in Tristram Shandy argues that digressions are the life and soul of reading, but perhaps it's time to get off these hobby horses and return to the King's Highway. My argument has been essentially that the memorabilia of the kind exhibited here is immensely valuable because they open up the past and they testify to a richness of life that is no more, but imaginatively perhaps can be experienced and recreated. Now, the Dunedin Public Library is not the great Platonic library of Borges, nor is it the British Library, but it is no disgrace to live in their shadow, because we in Dunedin have been supremely blessed by a wealth of archival materials. Here, in the special collections of the University Library, in the Hocken, there are assets of incomparable interest, whatever their monetary value, and some of that I think is probably quite considerable too. We've been fortunate in Dunedin to be the beneficiaries of scholars and gentlemen such as Esmond de Vere, Charles Brash, and the only begetter of this collection, A.H. Reid, whose commissioned agents gather these materials, often as unsold lots, or on speculation, ship them to New Zealand on the other side of the world. And that phrase, which is now a bit of a cliche, was not the kind of cliche that it is then, when at the other side of the world was a very long way away. So getting that material here from the UK, I think, again, rouses these sort of questions of wonder. How was this done? How did he have the initiative to do this? Why did he do this? So I would like simply to end on a note of appreciation for Anthony, who's done such a splendid job of putting together this exhibition of royal autographs, wills, memorabilia of the British monarchy, and also for the foresight of Alfred and Isabel Reid in gathering them in the first place, and so making this evening possible. Ephemera of their times, their treasures of today, and we are the richer for them.